few comments around some pressing environmental issues facing the industry that IATA is leading the charge on. Climate change related, I'd also like to mention a little bit around our work on cabin waste, and then of course happy to take questions from you afterwards. Well, as you heard this morning, the environmental agenda generally and climate change specifically continues to dominate the industry agenda. This chart here, just to illustrate that, shows Google searches over the recent period, and not aviation specific, but Google searches on carbon emissions have seen a steady increase just since 2017. So there's clearly global concern around carbon emissions generally. There's global concern around aviation's role in impact on climate change. We've seen in the past 6 months, as we also heard in the AGM on the floor this morning, the rise of some anti-aviation sentiment around the world, the flying shame movement that we all know about emerging in Sweden, flight-free campaigns in a number of different jurisdictions. But of course, climate scrutiny on aviation is nothing new. This is an issue that we have been addressing for the last decade. Back in 2008, under the umbrella of the Air Transport Action Group, ATAG, the industry set a very proactive and ambitious climate action strategy based around the famous 3 carbon reduction goals and our multi-pillar strategy, which you all know very well. So this isn't a new issue, but it is one which we continue to take extremely seriously. And I must say we have made real progress. The flight that all of us took to arrive here in Seoul produced 50% less CO2 than the same flight would have produced in 1990. That is a considerable achievement. And the efficiency improvements have been reached through a combination of new aircraft and engine technology, better operational measures, and improvements in airport and air traffic management infrastructure. As you know, we have a short-term objective of 1.5% fuel efficiency improvement, annual fuel efficiency improvement per year. Since we adopted that target in 2009, we've achieved a 17% fuel efficiency improvement and are currently tracking at an annual average of nearly 2.5%. However, we recognize the need for some form of economic regulation, the adoption of a market-based measure to complement the CO2 reduction initiatives that we're undertaking. We are confident that technology, infrastructure, operational measures will get us to our long-term objective, but in the mid-term time period, we recognize the need for a market-based measure to assist. And that market-based measure is in the form of the famous CORSIA agreement, the ICAO Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, which is adopted by ICAO at the 2016 ICAO Assembly. CORSIA is now up and running. It's a reality. As of the 1st of January 2019, all operators flying international routes have been monitoring their CO2 emissions and reporting them to their national authorities. So all airlines operating internationally, whether their government has volunteered for early participation in the scheme or not, all airlines flying internationally are meeting the MRV requirements. So this is a day-to-day reality. The strength of CORSIA we consider is that over the lifetime of the scheme, projected to be out to 2035, 2.5 billion tons of CO2 will be mitigated. That will be done through investment by airlines in carbon reduction projects elsewhere in the economy, whether that be wind energy projects, methane capture, forestry projects, a whole range of different initiatives which can also bring social and economic benefits to a local economy. So CORSIA will bring around a genuine reduction in CO2. At the same time, we see it attracting $40 billion worth of investment in climate finance, which is a significant amount. From an industry perspective, we've been doing our best to support the implementation of CORSIA through a wide-ranging capacity building initiative over the last couple of years. We have arranged nearly 30 workshops on CORSIA. Over 700 airline executives have been through training on CORSIA in one form or another. IATA has also implemented a reporting tool, FRED+, which assists all airlines in meeting their reporting obligations under the CORSIA scheme. Just a word on offsetting. CORSIA obviously implements a global offsetting mechanism on airlines, but many passengers continue to see the need for voluntary carbon offsetting. There is strong evidence that passengers personally want to take responsibility for mitigating the impact of their flights through offsetting. In 2010, IATA set up a system which offers a mechanism whereby airlines can propose voluntary carbon offsetting to their customers. Interestingly, we hear from passengers that they want their airlines to offer voluntary offsetting. However, for various reasons, the take-up rates of voluntary offsetting vary from carrier to carrier, from region to region. But it is clearly an important option for passengers to take. We all offset the flights that we undertake for business within IATA across the organization. Many corporates do exactly the same. And it's clearly somewhere where individuals feel that they can take responsibility for the climate impact of their individual flight. Now, rightly, the question is then posed, what next? We have CORSIA, which, as I say, is a day-to-day reality as of today. For all airlines flying internationally from 2021, the obligation to purchase offsets will kick in also. But the legitimate question is then, what next? Is CORSIA enough? And as you're aware, the industry has committed that by 2050 it will have halved its CO2 emissions when compared with 2005 levels. So CORSIA is key in the midterm, but we also believe very strongly in the industry commitment to this 2050 target. The 2050 target that we've set is in line with the Paris Agreement commitment also, and is one which we are working actively within the industry to define the pathway of how we reach that 2050 objective. Clearly, a key issue in the pathway to 2050 is the issue of technology. And in the short to mid-term, we see CO2 reductions coming around from two sources. Improvements in the current aircraft fleet through evolutionary methods, evolutionary improvements to existing fleet, and in greater commercial deployment of sustainable aviation fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel is obviously a key issue, as we heard on from a number of speakers this morning in the IATA AGM. Moving into the 2035 time period and beyond, we're looking at radically new aircraft and engine configurations, whether that's blended wing, strut-based wing designs, as well as electric propulsion. That's where we see the real CO2 reductions coming, which will push us towards the 2050 objective. Sustainable aviation fuels, as I mentioned, is a very exciting area. We've seen a number of recent announcements in this space, not least of which the recent announcement of the project between KLM and Sky Energy in the Netherlands. We're seeing a number of these announcements coming online, and we believe that although today the existing volumes are very low, we've actually come a very long way on the journey towards commercial deployment of sustainable aviation fuels in a relatively short period of time. Remember, the first test flight was only 10 years ago, 2008. The first plant producing regular supply of alternative fuels was only came online in 2016. So we have actually progressed really quite far in a short space of time. But we think that if we can aim for a 2% of the total fuel supply to come from sustainable sources by the middle of the next decade, that will provide the necessary momentum to propel us to a genuine energy transition. Let me move on from climate change then, just to mention the related but distinct topic of cabin waste. This is becoming a significant concern for airlines, but it's one of those issues where it's not solely within our power to resolve it. IATA analysis shows that in 2018, the airline sector generated over 6 million tons of cabin waste. That included nearly between 20 and 30% of untouched food and drink. Now the issue is because of different regulatory regimes in the countries in which airlines operate, it is often not permitted to either reuse or recycle much of that cabin waste, and it simply goes to incineration. So we are beginning to work with governments to try and have a better regulatory approach adopted, more harmonization between countries to ensure that the restrictions on reuse and recycling of cabin waste can be lifted. And we worked with airlines over the last year to develop some guidance material for them, both in reducing cabin waste in the first place, but then also how to deal with the different regulatory regimes which apply. Single-use plastics is a big part of that. As of today, 60 countries around the world have legislation restricting single-use plastics. These are non-aviation specific regulations, but obviously airlines are covered by them. The concern with driving towards alternative solutions to single-use plastics is that they need to be done having analyzed the overall life cycle assessment, because we have to make sure that by solving a marine problem, by removing single-use plastics from the environment, it simply isn't transferred into a climate problem by making the materials brought on board aircraft heavier, inducing increased fuel burn and increased CO2 emissions. So this is an issue where we will, again, in the coming months, work with governments as they begin to adopt this legislation to ensure a harmonized approach across the sector, which will both resolve the marine problem, avoid adding to the climate problem, whilst facilitating the operational environment for our members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So, we're happy to take some questions. Who would like to go first? Yes, you go first.
Hello, Robin Ironside from The Australian. Is there any evidence that IATA has of passengers choosing airlines based on their environmental credentials?
The answer to that is not really. It's not. We always look at the issue of climate change on a global level. The targets we've set apply across the sector. The regulatory approach which we pushed, the ICAO Corsia scheme, would apply on a global level. So we don't look in the detail of the personal choices which passengers are making with regard to the airline issues.
Do you think it could go down that route?
Well, if I may, Michael, I think one of the issues that we would like to stress is a bit similar to safety, that we see the environment issue as a non-competitive issue for airlines. So we're fostering an approach, an industry-wide approach, so we wouldn't want to encourage airlines to try and outdo each other, in terms of marketing themselves as more or less sustainable than the next. This is a bit like safety. This is an issue that we all face equally, so it's not something we would be looking at. Yes, Marissa, thank you.
Thank you, Marissa Garcia, Media. I wanted to ask you, speaking of cabin waste, specifically of the cabin component waste. Is IATA looking at that at all in terms of afterlife of cabin components like seat cushions and seat structures and overhead bins, oxygen masks getting taken off, life jackets? There's an afterlife to all of that, so how are you accounting for it?
Last year, IATA working with a cross-sector group, both from the manufacturers and the decommissioning companies, we looked at the issue of decommissioning aircraft and decommissioning every single component part of an aircraft to ensure that it's done in a safe, secure, and environmentally friendly manner. We have a very close relationship with AFRA, which is the association representing the recycling companies in the aviation sector, to ensure that the concerns that you alluded to are met throughout the decommissioning process. A number of airlines have taken very proactive approaches to that, and we think that there's an issue where we've taken a proactive and responsible approach to make sure that that doesn't exacerbate our climate change.
And that document is available on our website.
Just a quick follow-up question though, specifically to marking, because I have spoken to some of the recyclers, and they've pointed out that the marking is not really classifying the type of plastics used, which complicates the recycling process. Is that at all on the dialogue?
We're not aware that that's a specific concern that's felt across the sector. Again, we have facilitated the development of best practice across the whole sector, involving all the stakeholders involved, but that's not a specific concern that we've been raised.
Yes, from here, thank you.
Robert Sloan, Travel Weekly. So to get to 2% of SAF production by 2025, you're looking at a little bit less than 2 billion gallons probably. I think last year there was about 4 million gallons of production in the entire world, and virtually all of it in one refinery in the LA area. So how do you get there, and what government action do you need to get there? Because I know at that refinery most of their capacity is still with renewable diesel because they get more subsidies, more assistance with that.
So the current volume is around 0.01% per year. We, as you say, we believe that getting to 2% would provide the necessary uptake. What that means essentially is that by 2025, the annual supply of sustainable aviation fuel will be equivalent to the total supply that we've seen of sustainable aviation fuel in the last decade. So it's a significant increase, but it's one which we think is within grasping distance. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. What does it need to get there? It needs, I think, ambitious and forward-thinking decisions by our airlines to invest in sustainable aviation fuel projects, to enter into long-term offtake agreements to ensure that the necessary confidence is there for the producers. But you note the important role of government, and I think that's clear. We need governments in different jurisdictions to adopt the kind of policy frameworks which encourage the development of SAF facilities, which ensure that aviation is given at least a level playing field with other modes of transport for the use of alternative fuels, if not preferential treatment. So aviation, I think, has to be prioritized as a user of liquid alternative fuels. The reason being that for the immediate time period, we do not have an alternative to heavy liquid fuels, and so we believe that the supply that is there should be prioritized for the aviation sector, and individual governments can take policy decisions which ensure that.
Michael, am I right in thinking that almost half of that 2% is due to come online actually quite soon, with the production facilities already in progress?
We think that there are at least 6 plants currently under construction, which will come into operation in the next 2 to 3 years. That in itself, as I say, Chris, would produce half of the 2% that we think is a realistic objective. So the other half is out there. It's within reaching distance. We just need to grasp the opportunities. Governments need to grasp the opportunities that will allow for that.
Thank you for your question. Next. Thank you. Yes.
I'm sorry, Kathy with Aviation International News. I'm still a little puzzled which kind of government policies you would like to see in place. It's difficult to play with a tax incentive like they have done on the road to move from diesel to biodiesel because there is no tax on kerosene. So which government incentives would you like for them to prioritize the aviation biofuel?
Well, there's a whole range of different options which a government can take, and we think they need to be done very, very much specific to the local circumstances of the country concerned. So it can be, as I said, making sure that any incentives for the use of alternative fuels in other modes of transport are given to aviation. Aviation is given exactly the same treatment. It also means public money being invested into research and technology, into new facilities, new production processes, new kinds of feedstock. At the moment we have 5 certified pathways for the production of aviation fuel. We should limit ourselves to those 5 and to carry out the research into alternative methods of producing alternative fuels, and frankly to navigate through the rigorous certification process needs, we believe, investment, and that should come from governments. I think governments can also give access to more cost-effective debt and cost-effective debt guarantees, giving capital grants for the construction of production facilities, and I think making sure that the economic support is given, diverted, if you like, from the traditional fossil fuel arena to into the sustainable aviation fuel.
Thank you. Yes, over here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Jason Romero with Freelance Media. Even under certain recession periods, IATA is projecting the number of passengers globally to go up quite dramatically, but at the same time, the age of very large aircraft is pretty much behind us. The A380 is dead, the 747 for passengers is dead. To what degree do you see that impacting the future of pollution from aircraft, CO2, when the number of passengers is going up, but the size of the aircraft are actually going down, so you have more passengers on smaller aircraft?
I think the key figure that we refer to is that since 1990, the CO2 emissions per passenger have halved. Now that's, as I say, significant progress that we made. Aviation, as everyone is aware, is 2% of man-made CO2 emissions. We've been 2% of man-made CO2 emissions since 1990, so we've maintained that level, which I think is a significant achievement. As we move ahead, I think the projected traffic growth which you allude to, there will be obviously some blips and plateaus along the way, but we do see that the doubling of traffic out to 2035 is likely. And our whole climate action strategy has, since 2008, has been predicated in decoupling CO2 emissions growth from growth in traffic. We're on that pathway, and we think that according to the strategy which I outlined and which many of you have heard on a number of occasions, we do think that we're going to continue on that trajectory of decoupling emissions from traffic.
Any more questions? We'll come to you just in case there's anyone who hasn't asked a question yet. Okay, in that case, yeah, Marissa and then Kathy again. So go ahead, Marissa.
Just going back to that question that Jason asked, following up on that. At the same time, you have a change in policy in certain governments, their attitude towards fuels and energy sources. Could you see that as a deterrent to getting the types of investment that you want in alternative fuels?
Sorry, would you mind just rephrasing that?
Yes, you have people who would propose that we fly with coal, clean coal. So the question is, do you see that type of attitude affecting investment in key markets where there might be development of alternative fuels that would benefit the industry?
If if I understand your question correctly, there are different policies in place in different regions around the world, different approaches and attitudes taken to climate change generally and to how individual sectors and aviation in particular should address its impact on climate change. As I said in my initial comments, to the initial question, we view this as a global issue where we need global solutions, and that's why we've so strongly promoted CORSIA as the single global measure to address aviation CO2 impact. It's why we're urging governments to move ahead with implementation. It's why we're urging more governments to consider volunteering for the initial phases, because we want to see a global standard applied, this global offsetting mechanism under the auspices of ICAO, avoiding the need for national or regional regulatory measures to address CO2 from international aviation. So we believe that with as wide a coverage as possible of CORSIA, that will level the playing field across the globe and bring around a genuine global solution to what is the global issue facing our world at the current time.
And Kathy?
Yeah. You mentioned here that there are about 40 airlines that have used your IATA offsetting scheme. That's about a quarter of your members. Is that correct? That's not very high. And do you have any idea, because you were very careful, you said you have the impression, that passengers want to offset. Do you have any idea how many do offset these days and in which regions there is the largest uptake?
As I said, the uptake of voluntary offsetting programs varies a lot from carrier to carrier. In some instances, it's 1 to 2% of all passengers. There are some airlines who have reached 10% of passengers offsetting. As I said, there's clearly a disconnect because we hear from passengers generally that they like the fact that their airlines have the option for voluntary offsetting. Now, I can't personally explain why those same passengers don't take the option to offset their own emissions themselves. That boils down to, in my view, to personal choice and taking personal responsibility. And as I said, within the IATA organization, we all offset all of our related business travel, and we strongly encourage everyone who flies today to take the option of offsetting their own flights so that we can all collectively reduce the environmental impact of our sector.
Yes, at the back. Christine.
Hi, Christine Gill, Aviation. Just to go back to that issue of single-use plastics, something that comes to my mind, and I'm wondering if it's ever been brought up, is if airlines should continue to pass out bottles of water on flights, because that's an obvious problem if you see walking through a cabin at the end of any flight.
As I said, the difficulty with that is that in many instances, unused water and unused catering generally cannot be reused or recycled by the airline, and simply goes to incineration. That's because we're not able to take a harmonised approach to the regulation that applies. So that's something that we are urging governments to look at. Again, it also comes down to individual choices. Individual passengers can take their own water bottles with them to the airport, which they then fill in the departure lounge before they board the aircraft, and that obviously reduces the need for plastic on board the aircraft. There's a number of things which we can push governments to do, and there's also a number of things which, as individual passengers, we can solve ourselves.
Can't you suggest that at an airline level rather than government level? Like I said, having government out for can you hear me? I just said, couldn't you address it at an airline level? Just to say, airlines proactively change their policy in terms of that?
We're working with across the airline membership on how
10% a voluntary take on that. I had a conversation with an airline a year ago who thought they were very successful when they hit 0.5% of their passengers. And then it doubled year over year for a couple of years to get there. So 10% seems like a phenomenally crazy number. Can you give any details on who these airlines are?
I think it's probably largely driven by corporate customers and companies offsetting the business travel of their entire workforce.
You name the airline?
I'm not here to promote the interests of any individual carriers, but I think that's basically the range we're dealing with across the island.
Yes, okay, go ahead.
Carol Walker in Wood. Just going back to the cabin waste and plastics in general, I'm just trying to understand, would it, just as you've said, of course the industry wanted a global approach to that. I'm just trying to understand from the airline and IATA's perspective, would it be possible and also would it be desirable to have a single global approach to that aspect too, to have sort of a set of agreed rules and conditions for the airlines on that situation?
It's certainly an approach that we're discussing with members. As I've said, this is a recent development and one which we will continue to work on. As Chris said, a number of airlines have operated plastic-free flights. Qantas, Etihad have done this, and that shows that if possible, it also provides inspiration to other airlines that they can do the same thing. We'll continue to discuss with the carriers the extent to which we're able to agree on some global standards or global approach to this. That involves, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of consensus building across the sector amongst all the stakeholders. That takes time, it takes energy, and that's certainly something that we'll be looking into in the coming months. But the inspiration to do that is out there.
I think it's worth pointing out that it links back to this point about regulations as well. We can replace all the plastic with renewable element implements, but the current regulations, they would still have to be incinerated, so it would be, there would be little environmental benefit in that sense. Okay, we've got time for one more question in the room. I think, well, Kathy, you asked several. Someone else, someone at the back, but maybe they've gone. Okay, so, yes, sorry, so you have asked a question, so go ahead. At the front here. Okay, Steve, we'll just go to this gentleman right at the front first, and then Steve, we'll come to you.
No, it's okay, Steve can go.
Okay, go ahead, Steve, sorry.
I just wanted to ask about ATC and we're starting trials now on space-based ADS-B. What sort of difference do you think that will make?
I think I would just highlight again and underline that our approach to our climate action strategy involves contribution coming from all areas of activity. So I would never single out the role of any contribution from any of the areas, but it's clear that improvements in air traffic management can bring about significant emissions reductions. Depending on the region that you're dealing with, the level to which the potential improvement is there would vary, but it clearly has a big role to play. It's one which we're continuing to work with the ANSP community to see through and really make the most, maximize the CO2 reduction potential from improvements.
So did you want to ask something? Okay. Look, we're going to leave it there for now. I know one or two of you have requested one-on-ones with Michael. So if you could stay behind those people I emailed earlier, and we'll arrange those for you now. Okay, thank you very much.